For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 4572 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 4572, a bill to amend the Communications Act of 1934 to extend expiring provisions related to the retransmission of signals of television broadcast stations and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Walden, and the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous materials in the record on the bill.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, today we're offering a bill that will ensure that 1.5 million subscribers in hard-to-reach areas, including many in my home state of Oregon, will continue to receive vital news and information through the television. The Stella Reauthorization Act extends the copyright and retransmission consent provisions for distant signals retransmitted by commercial satellite providers for 5 years. Now, our committee has worked hard on this bill. We've engaged members of industry and consumer groups. We've talked about the difficult policy matters that affect all consumers when it comes to video programming. Every member of our committee on both sides of the aisle is engaged with industry and consumers to figure out the right policy and to get the right outcome, which we bring to you today. Our bill not only reauthorizes the compulsory copyright and retransmission exemption for 5 years, but it also targets and in some areas gives much needed reforms to our communications law. Specifically, this bill repeals the FCC's integration ban on cable lease set-top boxes. Now that clears the way for innovation and investment by lifting an unnecessary regulatory burden that has cost the cable industry and its consumers who pay the bill $1 billion, Mr. Speaker, since 2007. I especially want to thank my friend, the extraordinary, terrific Vice Chair of the Telecommunications Subcommittee, Mr. Latta of Ohio, and my Democratic colleague from Texas, Gene Green, who brought this issue to our attention and helped us in this bipartisan lift to get rid of the integration ban. Our bill also evens the playing field for cable operators and broadcasters during Sweeps Week by removing a government restriction on cable's ability to drop broadcast signals during the Nielsen sweeps. Additionally, the broadcast stations in a single market will no longer be able to negotiate jointly with pay TV providers. Pay TV subscribers will no longer have to worry about losing more than one signal should a programming distributor be unable to reach a retransmission consent agreement with a broadcast station. Now, these can be very contentious matters, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to say that the Stella Reauthorization Act is yet another example of working together, getting true bipartisanship with support from all sectors of the communications industry. This type of collaboration has long been the hallmark of our subcommittee and full committee, and I'm pleased to see this legislative result. I can only urge the Senate to act swiftly and pass this bill into law before the end of the year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Vermont is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Oregon, my friend Mr. Walden. And today, Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 4572, the Stella Reauthorization Act, a bill that allows satellite providers to continue to offer broadcast television programming to their subscribers. Americans across the country will benefit from reauthorizing the expiring communications and copyright statute that allows satellite customers to have access to broadcast content. But it particularly benefits rural communities, a concern of many of us in this body. Folks from Vermont are going to benefit by this. They rely heavily on satellite for access to video programming. The Stella Reauthorization Act is the work product of 2 committees, the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Judiciary Committee. Because of the bill's complexity, both substantively and procedurally, the Communications and Technology Subcommittee held a series of hearings starting early last year to examine the various issues affecting our nation's ever-evolving video marketplace. As a result, H.R. 4572 includes several targeted provisions designed to improve regulatory parity in the video marketplace. One, the bill prohibits two non-commonly owned broadcasters from jointly negotiating for retransmission consent with cable and satellite companies. Two, the bill also includes a compromise on the deadline for broadcasters to unwind certain joint sales agreements and an attempt to keep intact the FCC's local broadcast ownership rules. The final provision we are voting on today strengthens the waiver process both for the broadcasters seeking to maintain their joint sales agreements as well as for the FCC looking to streamline waiver applications. In addition, the bill eliminates the FCC's integration ban for cable set-top boxes, a rule that was designed to help promote a retail market for cable set-top boxes that regrettably is not working as intended. To allow independent manufacturers of set-top boxes a chance to compete, the FCC requires both cable companies and third-party set-top box manufacturers to rely on the same piece of technology to decrypt their signals, called the cable card. Not only has this regime not resulted in the kind of competition Congress envisioned, energy experts told us that the cable card actually creates significant energy inefficiencies. So our bill takes this rule off the books, but does not place any forward-looking restrictions on the FCC's authority to continue to promote retail competition for set-top boxes. But these narrow changes only begin to scratch the surface of the broken video marketplace. My view, Congress should revisit the entire video regime and update the corresponding laws to better represent 21st century marketplace, to drive competition, and most importantly, to provide more benefits to consumers. The various stakeholders, from distributors to programmers to broadcasters and content providers, have all been able to reap financial rewards, as they should, in this video marketplace. But my concern and the concern of many of us is that the consumer has been left out of the equation. They've paid on average twice the rate of inflation annually for cable over the past 20 years. I understand there are a lot of costs that go into the overall rate to consumers, but it is time for the consumer concerns to be heard and responded to. So I want to thank Chairman Upton and Chairman Walden for working with ranking members Waxman and Eshoo and Democrats. Thank you, gentlemen, on the bipartisan compromise on this bill. And I urge my colleagues to support the passage of this bill today. But I do hope that this is only the beginning and we can work together on a more comprehensive bill to address the broken aspects of the video marketplace. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. For purpose, the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to reclaim my time.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with that, I would recognize the leader of our Energy and Commerce Committee, the distinguished gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Stella Reauthorization Act is a very important piece of must-pass legislation that ensures that millions of satellite TV subscribers continue to receive broadcast TV programming from their chosen satellite provider. The bill represents the best of what our committee does, works together to produce bipartisan bills that does indeed strengthen our economy and streamline our laws for the innovation age. In addition to extending the laws that permit satellite providers to bring broadcast signals to hard-to-reach customers, the bill also makes targeted reforms to our nation's woefully outdated communication laws. As our committee prepares for an update of the Communications Act, these reforms are small examples of some of the deregulatory changes that we can make to spur investment in communications networks and promote competition. The bill eliminates the costly cable card integration ban that has increased the cost of cable-leased set-top boxes and made them less energy efficient. It evens the playing field for cable and satellite providers when it comes to protecting broadcast signals during Nielsen sweeps. It brings fairness to retransmission consent negotiations by barring broadcast stations from jointly negotiating with programming distributors, and it ensures that broadcasters who have had their business models upended by recent FCC actions indeed have adequate time to make the changes necessary to comply with the new rules. The bill is good policy, and we hope that the Senate will take quick action to enact this must-pass law for the millions depending on satellite TV. I want to particularly thank the Subcommittee on Communications and Tech Chair Mr. Walden from Oregon, Ranking Members Henry Waxman and Anna Eshoo, and our respective staffs for their bipartisan work from the start on this very important legislation. I'm proud of this product, and as we work towards the COMACT update to modernize our nation's communications laws for the innovation era, continued cooperation will be critical, very critical to our success. So I would urge my colleagues to support this bill. I yield back to the gentleman from Oregon my time.
Reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Vermont is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Conyers.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, and I thank the floor leader for his generosity. I, like my colleague from New York, Mr. Nadler, rise in support of this bipartisan legislation for several reasons. To begin with, Section 119 of the Copyright Act expires on December 31st. It's particularly important for unserved households, namely customers who can't receive an over-the-air signal of a local network. Thus, if Congress fails to act, millions of Americans stand to lose access to their broadcast television service. H.R. 4572 responds to this problem in pertinent part by extending for 5 years the Section 119 license authorization, thereby ensuring continued service to millions of Americans. The other reason that I support this bill is that it's a good example of how Congress can work on a bipartisan basis and produce legislation offering effective solutions. There are many issues regarding the relationship between broadcast television stations and distributors that would benefit from similar efforts by stakeholders working together to see if consensus can be obtained. In particular, I've long argued that content creators should be compensated appropriately for their works. Negotiations in the free market can often best ensure that artists and content creators are fairly compensated. In some cases, we've seen consumers pulled into the middle of such negotiations. No one wants this to happen, and it's not good for consumers, nor is it good for the parties involved. And finally, this legislation comports with two important guiding principles. Consumers should be protected, and competition should be safeguarded. All of us consumers benefit from increased competition because it typically facilitates lower prices while also generating more innovation, variety, and options. Consumers want the flexibility to watch programming on their choice of television set, phones, and tablets, no matter where they are. We should also recognize that many consumers very much value local news and sports programming and need the local channels to deliver community service and emergency information. Thus, we should continue to consider ways to increase programming options for subscribers to cable or satellite television.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. Accordingly, I urge my colleagues to support the bill, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Yields back. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thanks, Speaker. Now I'm honored to recognize the gentleman from Virginia, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. Goodlatte.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This afternoon, the House is considering joint Judiciary and Energy and Commerce Committee legislation to ensure that our rural constituents continue to have access to network channels on America's 2 satellite carriers. Title II of the legislation extends the expiring Section 119 copyright license for another 5 years, as this committee has done on previous occasions, most recently in 2010. This license ensures that when our constituents do not have access to a full complement of local network television stations, they can have access through satellite television carriers to distant network television stations. This helps ensure that consumers in rural areas, like my congressional district, have the same access to news and entertainment options that consumers in urban areas enjoy. Without enactment of this legislation, many of our constituents would potentially lose access to certain networks altogether on December 31st when the current license expires. I'd like to point out that although numerous stakeholders interested in video issues have contacted the Judiciary Committee on a variety of issues, they all agree that this license should not expire at the end of this year. Other issues of interest in this area will be the subject of further discussions as the Judiciary Committee continues its ongoing review of our nation's copyright laws. I want to express my appreciation to the Chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Upton, and the Chairman of the Telecommunications Subcommittee for their efforts, Mr. Walden, for their efforts on this reauthorization as well, and I look forward to continue to work with them on this important issue, important to all of our constituents. And I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Vermont is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to a member of the Judiciary Committee, the member from New York, Mr. Nadler.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 4572, the Stellar Reauthorization Act of 2014, which renews for another 5 years the statutory license that allows satellite providers to retransmit distant signals into a local broadcast area in certain circumstances. The satellite distant into local license contained in Section 119 of the Copyright Act is set to expire on December 31st of this year. Among other things, that license allows satellite carriers to provide an out-of-market station to customers who are not served by local television broadcasts. Enacted in 1988, when the satellite industry was in its infancy, the Section 119 license was intended to foster competition with the cable industry and also to increase service to unserved households, those subscribers who cannot receive an over-the-air signal of a local network. In 2010, as was the case on 3 prior occasions, Congress extended the Section 119 license for another 5 years. In granting cable and satellite providers a statutory right to retransmit copyrighted content at a government-regulated rate, Congress has created an exception to the general rule that creators have exclusive rights to their works, including the right to determine when and how to distribute them. This licensing system replaces the free market, something that we are generally reluctant to do. And when we did so for cable and satellite providers, these industries were just starting up, and the licenses were intended to encourage growth, foster competition, and enhance consumer access. On these fronts, the system has been a tremendous success. It is estimated that nearly 90% of American households now subscribe to a paid TV service provided by multi-channel video programming distributors, in most cases cable or satellite operators, and nearly all households have a choice of at least 3 different providers. Nonetheless, the dramatic recent changes in marketplace dynamics, as well as technological advances that continue to revolutionize ways of distributing video programming content, raise legitimate questions about whether the statutory licensing system in the Copyright Act is still needed or should be changed. I support this 5-year reauthorization of the Section 119 distant into local satellite license. We still need answers as to how many households would actually lose one or more of the 4 major network channels if Section 119 was not renewed. I nonetheless support this 5-year reauthorization because it will ensure that consumers who are receiving service by virtue of the Section 119 license retain that service when the agreements providing for that service expire at the end of the year. I hope we use the time afforded by this renewal to make the modifications to see if we have to keep the statutory license and keep away from the free market, or modify the statutory license in the future. But for the time being, we ought to extend it and renew this license now. I therefore urge my colleagues to join me in voting for H.R. 4572, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for his comments. I now recognize the distinguished gentleman from Ohio, the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, Mr. Latta.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Well, I thank the gentleman, the chairman of the subcommittee, for yielding. And, Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 4572, the Stellar Reauthorization Act. For the last several months, members of Congress have been earnestly engaged in the collaborative discussions and a great deal of work regarding the reauthorization of the Satellite Television Extension Localism Act. This must-pass legislation is key to ensuring that over 1.5 million consumers of satellite television service do not lose access to programming they rely on when the current measure is set to expire at the end of this year. Through Chairman Upton and Walden's thoughtful leadership, the Stella Reauthorization Act also includes a few discrete and narrow reforms of laws governing the video marketplace. These reforms represent a critical step forward in modernizing our communication laws to reflect the rapidly evolving, dynamic, and competitive communications marketplace we have today. I'm especially pleased that a provision from my bipartisan bill, H.R. 3196, with Congressman Gene Green, was included in this measure to eliminate the current set-top box integration ban. Repealing this outmoded technological mandate will foster greater investment and innovation in the set-top box market, but more importantly, will help decrease the cost of video delivery to consumers. Since the FCC adopted the integration ban, we've seen a tremendous amount of progress and competition in the video marketplace organically develop outside the set-top box retail market, all absent government regulation. Now, given the myriad devices and means through which consumers can access video content, the integration ban is simply an unnecessary regulation that does not reflect the state of competition, technological advancements, or consumer demands of today. The elimination of the integration ban, along with a few other targeted reforms included in Stella, underscores a bipartisan commitment to ensuring that our communication laws maximize the potential for investment, innovation, and consumer choice. And I once again commend Chairman Upton and Walden for their leadership in this effort. Our priority in reauthorizing Stella has long been to ensure a continuity of service for satellite subscribers, and today's vote marks a critical step forward in fulfilling that responsibility. I urge my colleagues to vote yes and support this bipartisan legislation. And I once again thank the chairman for yielding. And Mr. Speaker, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Vermont is recognized.
We have no more speakers. One final word. I congratulate Mr. Latta and Mr. Green for their very good work making a good bill better. And I want to also salute Mr. Upton and Mr. Walden for their good work along working closely in partnership with Mr. Waxman and Ms. Eshoo. We have no more speakers. I urge a yes vote on this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Gentleman from Vermont for his kind words and his good work on this legislation. Certainly recognize our counterparts on the Democratic side, Mr. Waxman and Ms. Eshoo, who have worked tirelessly on this bill as well, and their staff, Sean Chang, Margaret McCarthy, David Grossman, who worked hard on this, and ours, David Rettel, my senior policy advisor, Ray Baum, and Grace Coe, all of whom have spent a lot of time working this through. It seems interesting we get to this point, and it kind of goes naturally, and there was a lot of work went into getting it to this point. So I thank our staffs and I thank our members who really worked with us in a very good-spirited way. With that, Mr. Chairman, Speaker, I would urge the House to approve this bill without objection, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 4572 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. And without objection, the title is amended.